So right now, one shooting in Minneapolis is turning into a much bigger national story, not just because of what happened on the street that day, but because of how the government, politicians, and major institutions are responding to it, and because those responses are likely to shape how similar situations are handled in the future. You see, on January 24th, 37-year-old ICU nurse Alex Pretti, who was a U.S. citizen and a legal gun owner, was shot and killed by federal ICE immigration agents in Minneapolis while filming them with his phone during an operation, even though multiple bystander videos show that he never raised his weapon and never fired a single shot. Pretti had a permit to carry, he was legally armed, and according to the footage that has circulated online, he appeared focused on recording rather than confronting agents, with no visible sign that he was threatening anyone at the start of the encounter. Within hours of the shooting, federal officials said the incident was justified because Pretti was armed and approached agents, which in practical terms meant the government was taking the position that simply being in proximity to law enforcement while carrying a firearm can be enough to justify deadly force. The Trump administration backed that position quickly, arguing that agents have to make split-second decisions in dangerous environments and that the presence of a weapon, even if it's never pointed, creates a legitimate threat that officers are entitled to respond to. Now, that argument immediately raised a lot of concerns in a lot of places, including with the National Rifle Association, or the NRA, which almost never publicly criticizes Republican administrations, but in this case said the government's reasoning was wrong and dangerous, warning that Americans have a constitutional right to carry firearms even while filming or protesting law enforcement, and that turning legal gun ownership into justification for lethal force crosses a line. And when the NRA is willing to say that out loud, it usually means they think a precedent is being created that could come back to haunt gun owners later. Now, much of the public reaction is centered on the video because what people can see on camera does not perfectly match what officials initially described, with footage showing Pretti holding his phone at the beginning of the encounter, appearing calm and focused on recording, and with the firearm only becoming visible on the ground after a physical struggle had already begun. Now, that does not automatically mean agents acted illegally, because real-life encounters are chaotic and people misread situations under pressure. But it does mean investigators, lawyers, and courts are now going to examine every second of that footage to determine exactly how the situation unfolded and whether deadly force was truly necessary. As that legal process begins, the political response has already moved ahead at full speed, with Pretti's death quickly becoming a major funding fight in Congress that has nothing to do with Minneapolis on its surface, but everything to do with accountability. Lawmakers have until January 30th to pass roughly $1.2 trillion funding bills that keep the federal government running, and that bill includes money for the Department of Homeland Security and ICE, the same agencies involved in the shooting. After Pretti's death, Senate Democrats began saying they would not support any funding package that included DHS money without new oversight and changes, with Senator Angus King, Amy Klobuchar, Patty Murray, and Chuck Schumer all publicly signaling opposition and warning that they would block the bill if DHS funding stayed attached. That stance immediately raised the possibility of a partial government shutdown, not over taxes or spending levels, but over how federal law enforcement should be held accountable when civilians are killed. Republicans, meanwhile, had already passed the bill in the House and left Washington, effectively betting that Democrats would not want to risk shutting down parts of the government, while Democrats were betting the Republicans would not want to be seen defending DHS without reforms. So now both sides are using the deadline as leverage, and federal workers are stuck waiting to see which side blinks first. Over the coming weeks and months, there will be investigations, lawsuits, and internal reviews, and possibly congressional hearings, all aimed at determining whether this shooting met legal standards and whether policies need to change as a result. If courts ultimately side with the government, agencies will likely continue operating under the same rules and training guidelines, while if courts find fault with how this was handled, departments will be pressured to revise procedures, clarify use of force standards, and tighten oversight. Either way, this case will not simply disappear because it will be cited by lawyers, studied by departments, and referenced by lawmakers whenever similar incidents happen in the future. My view is that this story is not really about one moment on the street in Minneapolis, but about how much discretion federal agents are allowed to have and how much explanation they are required to provide when someone dies during an operation. Once that line is drawn in one high-profile case, it tends to carry forward into others, shaping expectations on both sides of the badge. If this leads to clearer rules and meaningful oversight, something constructive can come out of something tragic. But if it doesn't, then very little changes and the same arguments will resurface the next time something like this happens. Because there will always be a next time. That is what people should be paying attention to here. Not the political shouting or the social media outrage, but the standards that come out of this and how they get applied going forward. I'm Hank, here to explain the chaos, not hype it. If you want clarity instead of noise, you're in the right place.